Oh, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's meeting of the Scrutiny Committee on Wednesday, the 6th September 2023 from the Walton Suite. My name's Councillor Caroline Brooke. I'm chairperson of this committee, and there's just a few housekeeping points before we start. This meeting is being recorded, live streamed, and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are switched off or on silent, and in the unlikely event it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound, and please follow all instructions given to you by the team. Can I welcome members of the public this evening? So we have Monica and David from TACT, so welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. And welcome to everybody in the room. I'll invite anybody who wishes to make a contribution at the time, and can I also welcome the officers and cabinet members this evening, and Councillor Morris, whom I believe you're substituting for Councillor Ling. Thank you. So turning to the agenda.
Good evening, Chair members. We have one apology from Councillor Laming, who's been replaced by Councillor Morris this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Many thanks. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. In item number 6, I need to declare that I'm a council tenant because we're dealing with HRA outturn paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Noted. Any other declarations of interest? No. I have no announcements this evening. So turning to the minutes of the meeting of the 3rd of July, have you all had a chance to look at them, and are these agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So David and Monica, I understand you didn't have anything specific to say on the paper. So if I come on the HRA outturn paper, shall I come back to you at the end just to double check in case anything came to mind during the discussions? Wonderful, thank you. I understand that Councillor Wallace or Councillor Lee were going to speak. Councillor Lee, you're in the room. You want to speak on the specific paper or during public participation? Okay, so you'd like to speak on the HRA outturn. Okay, thank you. Nobody else wishing to speak? Okay. Right, so can I invite you forward then, Mr. Lee, because we will be just getting an intro to the HRA outturn paper, and then it will be for you to speak. So over to you, Councillor Westwood, for the intro, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the HRA 2022-23 outturn. So the housing revenue account outturn for the last year shows an overspend of £1.304 million, an adverse variance of £0.698 million. Whereas this could cause a concern, this includes a one-off accrual of £1.394 million, representing a claim made against a new build scheme that will be reversed back in 2023-24. The adverse variance will reduce the HRA general balance at the year end. There was a request to carry forward the unspent £18,000 of set-up funding for the council company Venture Living into 2023-24. There was a carry forward of 14.44 million slippage of the 2022-23 capital programme, with consequent reprofiling of the capital programme in 2023-24 onwards. Within the overall outturn, there are a number of variances that are worth recognising. Employees underspent by £0.108 million, £108,000, reflecting a tight employment market and delays in recruitment. Premises overspent by £2 million, but this included the accrual mentioned earlier of £1.304 million, as well as an overspend of 0.486 on repairs and maintenance. This is a demand-led service, as you all know. An overspend of 0.109 million on electricity, which is understandable in the circumstances last year, and a smaller overspend on insurance. Net interest and depreciation showed a net favourable variance of 0.622 million due to the lower interest payments, due to lower capital spend and internal borrowing, as well as a higher depreciation charge reflecting stock valuation and higher provision due to increased cost of components. The continued good performance on void management and arrears generated an additional income of £0.2 million. Turning to the underspend on the capital programme, there was an overspend of 2% on major works budget, reflecting fire prevention works and more roofing being completed in the year than originally programmed. Estate improvement works were delayed and underspent by 0.187 million due to a vacancy that has now been filled, thus taking those works forward into the current year. Sheltered schemes powered door installation work was delayed, leading to a £0.24 million underspend, and there was a delay in fire safety work to sheltered schemes. Spend on climate emergency works underspent by 0.328 million, reflecting the difficulty procuring Trustmark accredited contractors to undertake the work. There was an underspend of £0.207 million to procure a sewage treatment vehicle, but that procurement is progressing in the current year. The new homes programme underspent by 13.03 million, and the detail of the scheme slippage is provided in section 11 of the report, although the majority of the slippage is weather related or due to need to provide required nutrient mitigations. The HR capital programme for 2023-4 and onwards will be reprofiled. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Ms Keys, did you want to add anything? No? Okay. Councillor Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Wallace hoped to be here and sends his apologies. He wanted me to pass on thanks to the officers for a well-written and explained report. At section 1.2, the capital programme for retrofit of existing homes to high energy efficiency standards, some questions, if I may. When the 10-year 50 million budget, when was it first allocated? The second question, how much has been spent to the end of 2022-23? How many homes have been upgraded to the end of 2022-23? And did the creation of the new energy post happen? Is it filled? And is it being funded out of the £50 million budget? Then there's an observation with respect to the revised capital programme budget for 23-24. The question is, has there been included funding for overheating, which is obviously quite topical given what we're experiencing today. This is a growing issue, as over 1/3 of our homes are at risk of overheating in the future as climate change brings hotter summer temperatures. Recent changes to building regulations require measures to address overheating are for new homes only, not existing homes as I understand it. And I would suggest that this is something for next year's budget preparations, given the ongoing urgency of this. I commend to the officers the resolution report, foundation report, only of last month. It's getting hot in here, which indicates the size of the emerging problem. And then also the UK Green Building Councils, the UK isn't built for this heat, which I think, again, signposts the urgency to consider overheating as you go forward. Otherwise, of course, expand on the difficulties with recruiting and retention for housing and what steps have been taken to mitigate this issue. And section 11.3b, please can you provide more detail on the abortive costs on Tower Street? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Thank you for coming along and speaking to us today. I'm sure many of those points will get picked up as we go through the discussions. Thank you. So coming on to our questions, does anybody have any question on the main body of the paper that you have in front of you, minus the appendix? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Got a couple of points straight away, if that's okay. Page 25, 11.4, when it says in support of anticipated housing company setup costs. I was under the impression, because I've sat on cabinet housing for many years, that the housing company should have been formulated and on its way by now. So it'd be interesting to know what the cabinet member his view on that, because I've got a sort of backup question. If it's not been formulated, we obviously clearly haven't pushed it forward. So in the current form of as a housing department, do we need a separate housing company to fulfil all the other sort of tenures that we want to do as a council? So that's my first question, I'd say, relating to the housing company. My second point is on page 24, and it's to do with 11.3 about the new build overspend, and then there was an underspend on salaries. And I've made this point before, especially with the Valley scheme, which is a very fantastic Valley scheme in Stanmore. I was mentioning, was the new homes team well resourced, because we had some implications about the handover between different sections of the council, and I felt then that we were lacking resources in the new homes team. So I'm quite perplexed to see this section here. So perhaps the cabinet member or officers can explain how that came about, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Who'd like to take this one? Jane? Simon?
Thanks, Chair. In relation to the housing company, Cabcom Housing considered the business plan for the housing company Venter Living. That's been referred to full council next week, week after. The HRA is funding some of the setup costs of that company, because the properties which the housing company will lease are owned by the Housing Revenue Account. So the Housing Revenue Account generates the benefits from the company operating and leasing the properties from the HRA and covering some of the long-term costs over a 30-year period. So subject to what council agrees in a fortnight's time, if they agree with the recommendation from Cabcom Housing, which is to agree the business plan, then the company will be able to start trading. The company exists at the moment, but it's dormant because the shareholders agreement requires the council to agree a business plan for the company to start trading.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor Scott?
I'm probably being devil's advocate. What happens if full council doesn't agree with the housing company? What's difference if it obviously the property stay within the housing HRA, and obviously it's tenants' money HRA. So what's the difference if we don't move forward? What's the benefits that we need to go down this line? Because clearly we haven't done it, and this has been anticipated for a number of years. So why do we need to do it?
So the reason the council the Cabcom Housing is recommending the model at the moment is because if the company leases the properties from the council, it allows the company to offer short hold tenancies. My understanding is that was one of the original intentions for the development in Windle, the 41 flats, to allow tenure diversification. So they weren't going to be affordable housing, they're market rent properties directed at young professional people primarily, so it allows tenure diversification. Because the property can offer a market rent, and the market rent will obviously exceed what could be charged if the property were in the HRA. Therefore, the HRA benefits over the 30-year life of those properties in terms of the return that could be generated and the liabilities that would be generated if the properties remained in the Housing Revenue Account. So there's a financial benefit to the HRA from doing it, and there's also a benefit in terms of tenure diversification, the ability to offer a new housing product into the marketplace to meet specific needs in the district.
I'm coming to Councillor Hurrell next, but Councillor Lee, can I ask you to return to your seat, please? Thank you. Councillor Hurrell.
Yeah, can I interject? I had a second question.
Apologies, Councillor Scott. The second question. Over to Ginny. Apologies, Councillor. Yeah.
I'm not aware of a resources issue in the new homes team. They're fully resourced at the moment. The underspend of the employees is more to do with recruiting and some delays in recruiting. We're also very keen in the council to invest in people. So we often promote people within our team, which then is a subsequent vacancy. So we've had a little bit of that. You know, we've had people that have retired or left or chosen different occupations, but it isn't. It is something that is all committed to post. It's just an underspend last year.
Councillor Hall.
Out of practice then. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for the report this evening. Could I just ask, I don't think I get yet, I don't understand 11.2B, the accrual. What is that accrual about, the 1.3 million I think Councillor Westwood referred to? Could you just give me a better understanding, please, of that number? Also 11.2D and 11.3H talk about depreciation. We talked about depreciation in the HRA at the performance panel. What I'm trying to understand is why are we changing depreciation along the way? My understanding is we review that annually, we set that for the budget, but we seem to be in a situation where we're moving that as we go through the year, and I'm not really sure why we're taking that approach, or am I misunderstanding that it is not an annual discussion on depreciation? And Chair, there's a further question, which I think in fact Councillor Lee referred to. 11.7B, we basically didn't get the estate improvement work away. I know because I've got a project in there that hasn't moved, and it's because we haven't had a member of staff. And where we have just limited numbers in a team, then maybe only one in the team, if you don't recruit, you have a fundamental problem. And that's what we're seeing, in my view, in 11.7B. If I'm not understanding that correctly, please put me right. But it seems to me that work just simply hasn't happened because we have projects, but we haven't had the staff to implement that. So I'd be grateful for some guidance on all three of those, please, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that one for you, Mrs. Knight? Okay, we'll come to Councillor Westwood first then, because the first question was to you, Councillor Westwood.
Okay, it was quite clear when I said that there was a claim, the 1.394 million represents a claim made against a new building scheme. That claim is
one moment. One moment, Councillor Woodward, we will come back to you.
Sorry, just taking advice there. There's an existing case progressing, so we need to not discuss that in a public session. So we just wanted to advise Chair whether to move into exempt session or whether we could just not discuss the details of the case, but continue in the theme. See if we can get our message over without going into exempt.
Sadly, I had no intention of saying any more on that than I'd read out in my opening statement that this is a claim. And further than that, I would refer to Mrs. Keys on how it's accounted for.
Thank you, Councillor Woodward.
Then at some point, can we go to exempt? Because I don't think it's an unreasonable question to ask. It's a substantial number. So I don't mean to interrupt the meeting now, but I would like clarity at some point. Or if you prefer outside of the meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Hall, if you're happy, they'll pick that up with you separately, if that's okay. Thank you. Going to Mr. Hendy and Mr. Knight, are we ready for our answers? Please.
Sorry, Chair. We were just deciding who was going to do to respond to the point on depreciation that was it was discussed at the performance panel, wasn't it? There's annual valuation of the stock, which will inform the depreciation charge. You'll not be surprised to hear the cost of components has increased considerably, and in terms of the depreciation charge, should be remembered that's in effect a provision that's retained in a reserve in the housing revenue account to pay for future works. So if the cost of components are going up, we make a higher provision, and that provision goes into reserve, and then it funds major works in the future. So although higher provisions being made, it's not necessarily a loss to the housing revenue account, because it will enable us to meet those higher costs that we're predicting in the future, because at this point in time, component costs have increased in value. Does that answer the question?
So, Mr. Hendy, are we therefore reviewing property values more than annually now then? Because we did that for the budget, but correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we did it for the budget, but now we're having sort of mid-year changes, but Mrs. Keys is obviously keen to put me on the straight and narrow.
If that's okay, Chair. The depreciation is based on the valuations of the properties, and we do an estimation of what we think the depreciation will be when we set the budget, and then this depreciation charge was based on the actual valuations that we had done at the end of the year. So there is a variance to the budget because it's only estimated at the point where we set the budget for the forthcoming year, because we don't know what the valuations will be at that point.
Okay, so we're simply out of cycle in terms of our timings. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any other? Oh, yes, your third question. Sorry, Mrs. Knight, is that one for you?
Yeah. I take your point in respect to the delay in recruiting to the estate improvements officer role. I think, as you know, we went out several times with that round, even though I thought it was a really interesting job for someone to take on. But we did have an issue. We had someone that was due to start and didn't, so that process did drag on. I'm really confident now that it is resourced and we can really progress the 23-24 programme going forward.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the main body of the report? No. Councillor Hall?
Sorry, Chair, I do have some more. Councillor Lee raised it, and I think I raised this many months ago. So I'm just being clear on 11.3b. The original attempt at the property on Tower Street was to actually renovate it, but in the end we ended up disposing of that. Am I correct? And therefore we've got that gap that has come as a result of the efforts we made to bring it back into stock and make it fit for purpose, but actually weren't able to do that. And that is the cost of 205,000 that we spent. Is my understanding correct, please? Thank you.
That's correct. It was part of the New Homes Development Programme some years back, and we were looking at converting the existing property into 2-bedroom flats. It eventually became unviable to develop that. It would have the cost would have been more expensive than the value of the properties, and we felt it would be better invested elsewhere.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions on the main body of the report, Councillor Hall?
I do, Chair. Safety provision is 300,000 underspent. Fire safety, sorry, apologies, which is not necessarily a place that we'd all want to be, probably in the current circumstances. I'm sure people would want us to be spending as much as we can to bring everything to the correct level. And so we accept we've had some slippage, but we have robust plans in place to actually get back on track with that, given the sensitivity of that spend area and the importance of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we do. We have a newish compliance officer, as you know, and he has a very robust programme to get us back on to spec with that. We've carried out a huge amount of work at the moment in respect to our fire assessments. We've gone to a higher level, and all of this has caused some slippage in the additional work that contains.
Thank you.
Councillor Reach.
Thank you. Just a question on 11.7S. At the risk of lowering the tone, what is a sewage treatment vehicle, please?
I obviously get all the best questions. It's a tanker basically, which will remove stuff from cesspits and what have you. So yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions before we move on to the appendices? Okay, Appendix 1 then, sorry, page 29 of your packs. Do we have any questions on Appendix 1? Councillor Horrell.
We talk about in Appendix 1 the disrepair compensation payments that are bundled into this report, so it's not articulated specifically, but it's in one of the headings, and we know that is a particular area of, should we say, development in the legal profession, and just wanted to understand how we're managing that, tackling it and approaching that, given that people are being encouraged to try and pursue claims, and whether we have particularly feel that is a danger and an exposure for us in the future. Thank you.
Yes, it is a challenge in that there are many avenues out there being explored to encourage tenants to come to solicitors to make claims against the council. You know, we do maintain our homes very well, as you know. We've got 100% decent home standards, so we are confident that the claims that come we can settle generally. The obviously negativity of that is the solicitors make more money than our tenants, so it's a real incentive for us to make sure that we deal with the issues first time. Repairs are completed first time, and we're contract monitoring that. We are doing a big campaign as encouraged by Councillor Westwood to be proactive in reaching out to our tenants that maybe are suffering with damp and mould. So we're doing a big comms campaign around that, in order to say, if you've got damp and mould, we're the people you need to come to and we'll put it right. So we're trying lots of avenues to prevent tenants feeling the need to go to solicitors.
That's very encouraging. Thank you.
Any further questions on Appendix 1? Okay, Appendix 2 on page 30. If I may step in here, there was a question from Councillor Lee about funding for overheating. So looking through this seems like the right place to ask it. Is it covered in any of these, or is that something that would be considered?
It's not currently covered in our plans, but it's certainly something that we can take away and review, and we'll certainly read the report that you recommend. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on Appendix 2? Councillor Morris.
Yes, if you have some more detail on the other income, which seems to have been coming much less than was originally estimated, but then twice as much as the revised estimate. Could you give some more explanation on this and list some of the other, what actually are the other income streams?
That Mr. Hendy question. Right.
Chair, I'm sure it's dealt with in the report. If you, it just escapes me at the moment. I'm sure there was some commentary in the report on other income. Which I can't remember.
We'll come back to that question.
Yes, it's 11.2C. Several variances. So there's a commentary that explains it. 11.2C in the report.
I'll look at that, thank you.
Thank you, councillor Morris. Any other questions on Appendix 2? No, Appendix 3 then on page 32. Any questions on Appendix 4 on page 33? Councillor Horrell?
Chair, we obviously have made slower progress than perhaps some of us who are keen on pushing along the sort of capital programme might be, and obviously there is significant change in the numbers. Are there any prevailing issues with resourcing, legal? We've been assured by Mrs. Knight it's not staffing. Is it lack of resident and community commitment? Is it technical issues? What is it that is, or is it a bundle of issues that is slowing the pace of this important part of our activity, which I know we're grateful for the tenants supporting in trying to add to the affordable housing stock in the district? Thank you.
Councillor Woodward, did you want to comment on this one?
It's Councillor Westwood. Chair.
My apologies.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're all well aware of what's going on in the building trade, Chair, and we're all aware of what's going on in the economy. And if you look at our new builds, then our major site is at Winnop, and I think we're very clear on where we're going with that, and that was delayed over the winter, as we all know, and it is due for completion in calendar Q4. So you know, that is progressing as per plan. We're looking at the position at the end of March here. And we're also, if you look at the major chunk in North Whiteley, that's a developer's build where we've been buying and acquiring the houses in that area as well. They've had similar issues, and that significant amount of that spend there is pulled over because of those reasons. And you know, we now have completed the purchases at North Whiteley.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. What were you saying about?
We now have completed the purchases in North Whiteley, which is a significant part of that movement of funds from one period to another.
Thank you.
Any further questions on Appendix 4? Okay, Appendix 5. Do we have any questions on Appendix 5 on page 34? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, we all understand that the right to buy receipts, and now there's more pressure on us to make sure we get that money spent. Otherwise, we have to give more back than we received. And obviously, because of some of the fluctuations we're seeing, are we sufficiently robust in our thoughts that we can get that money away effectively within the schemes that are in a position to take that investment without clashes with other sources of funding? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. November, I think the Cabinet will be receiving medium-term financial strategy, including the draft housing revenue account business plan for the next 30 years. And I can assure you at the moment that makes plans to use all the available right to buy receipts to fund the New Homes programme. Saying that, of course, things can change, as you can see from this report, but it's definitely planned for that time.
Thank you.
Any other questions on Appendix 5? Appendix 6? And Appendix 7? No. Do we have any debates on this paper? Councillor Hall on
Sorry, I
question
did have
number
a question on Appendix 7. In terms of the revised budget for 23-24, how many new homes do we think we'll be delivering there? Do we know whether what that will contribute for that year? Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, we don't have that. We'll have to come back in writing on that.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Any debate? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I thank officers for bringing this paper to us tonight. It just goes in good detail of exactly what the housing section does do for the Winchester District residents and tenants. I'm very pleased that we've got TAC here tonight because their involvement is key to projects and services moving forward for our tenants as well. I do think when we looked back a number of years ago that at one time as a council we wasn't able to build houses. We just didn't have the capacity, didn't have the funding, we didn't have the go ahead from government, something like that. Now we are in such a good position that we've got this building team, new homes delivery team up and running, and we have built some substantial properties. Okay, we may not always be on track. We may always be nervous about, are we going to hit that 1,000 target, etc., etc. The other aspects of the housing department, it always seems sometimes negative when councillors come to offices with always the sort of the difficulties that tenants face and mould and damp, which comes to us through casework, whatever. But quite often we don't see the positive sides enough as councillors about the sheer day-to-day running of that sections across the property services, allocations, the housing estate, you name it, homelessness and all that sort of, all the aspects that the officers adhere to. It's really laid out for us in quite full exactly the extent that our housing department does. So I would like to thank officers, particularly Mrs. Blight, for heading that section up and thank for all their efforts they do for us and our tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Any other debate on this paper? No. David and Monica, do you have any comments now, or is there anything you'd like to say to us? I'm just going to summarise that for the video because you were at the back of the room, that you are pleased that there is money being approved for house buying next Wednesday, and that you have your AGM tomorrow where you'll discuss all of these key points and give your feedback. Wonderful. Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. Just a few words in debate, and I concur with Councillor Scott to say thank you to the officers. Staying close to housing, I know just how complicated a business it is. There are so many plates that you're spinning across the whole district. And we realise it's been difficult to recruit and hold staff in the current climate. and some of the impacts that that has obviously had. And also, this is a substantial business. There are big numbers and movements can be pretty significant on just a small handful of things. So I think those of us who follow it closely understand that and know that, and want to reassure you that you have our support for an incredibly important service that this council offers. I know many councils wish that they had the council houses that we have and the ability to offer that and to look after their residents. And also thank you to TACT for being supportive of how we approach this, because we do it with your support, and that again I think is important for officers and for councillors. So there is movement in this outturn report, and I'm sure there'll be further discussion about it, and obviously as we come to budget setting in due course. But I'm grateful for the answers this evening to a number of questions, and appreciate all the efforts that you have made during the year as a team. Hope that Mr. Hendy and Mrs. Knight will communicate that to the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I'd like to add my thank you to TACT for coming along this evening. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and we always appreciate your input. So I'm glad you're going to seize the opportunity tomorrow, and at least you've heard our comments today that you can feed in as well if that prompts some extra thoughts. And thank you to the team as always for bringing this to us. So our recommendation as a committee was that we scrutinise and comment on the proposals within the attached cabinet report, which will be considered by Cabinet's meeting on the 13th of September. The outputs we've cut from that is that they're going to come back to Councillor Horrell on the number of houses, homes as per Appendix 7, and take away to look at funding for overheating, whether they need to allocate funds, the risk, etc. of this. Other than that, do we feel that we've thoroughly scrutinised the paper and can move on to the next one? Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Lee, will it be you coming to the table again? Okay, I'll call you forward in just a moment. So we're coming on to the General Fund outturn paper. Councillor Cutler is going to give us his intro. And then Ms. Keys, if you have anything you'd like to add on the end. Over to you, Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Chair. You have before you the General Fund outturn report. The paper details the outturn against the budget of the 22-23 budget, which was approved in February 22, which we'd hoped would be into a less turbulent year after COVID. But in fact, of course, there was significant economic pressure, particularly with inflation, and the inflation pressure detailed in the report of nearly £1 million. But despite this, the outturn shows a surplus of just under 1 million. That's mainly due to the difficulty in forecasting business rates, 688,000 of that, and also a significant increase in the interest received on our retained funds. The paper details variances the under and overspends in services, and it shows the variances in one-off budgets, and also shows, well, there's plenty of detail in all the appendices in terms of the both the revenue fund and the capital fund. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Mr. Keys, did you want to add anything to that intro?
I would just concur with what Councillor Cutler said. It was a very difficult year where we had difficulties in forecasting due to pressures from the economy and factors such as that. There was an overspend on services, primarily due to higher than expected pay inflation and contract inflation, caused by factors outside of our control. And then there was a a surplus of income. There was over budget income that we received from the business rates. So that's a good news story that we retained more than we thought we would. And we had additional income from our investments, which was a combination of higher interest rates and also higher cash balances than expected. So overall, a net position there with surplus.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. So again, it's recommended the Scrutiny Committee scrutinise and comment on the proposals in the attached paper, CAB 3416, which is to be considered by Cabinet at the meeting again on the 13th of September. Does anybody have any questions on the main body of this paper? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. On page 41,
My apologies, Councillor Scott. Councillor Lee, I haven't invited you forwards. I'm sorry, I'm really distracted today. Councillor Scott will come back to you. Councillor Lee, my apologies.
Thank you. It's a very quick question, two parts. And again, just to thank the officers for a well-written and explained report. I wasn't here last year, but allegedly Councillor Wallace has indicated that to me that this is a quantum leap forward in terms of presentation. So thank you very much. On the Winchester Town account, please can you explain why the town only pays a contribution towards the cost of neighbourhood service officers, whereas parishes and market towns in the district are liable for the full cost of support officers in their areas? And can you also explain how this proportion is calculated? Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Lee. Councillor Lee. Would you like to answer that, Mr. Hinds?
Thank you, Chair. Regretting now that Mrs. Knight actually left because she had the answer written down, but hopefully I can remember it. I'm not sure what was meant by support officers, because the Winchester Town Forum makes a contribution to neighbourhood services. So I'm not sure what, so we don't employ specific officers for other parts of the district that are support officers as part of neighbourhood services. So if there's clarification of what's meant by that, we might be able to answer it. But at the moment, the Town Forum makes a contribution to overall neighbourhood services, as does the housing revenue account. And those neighbourhood services officers cover the district in total. So there's no specific support officers that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Scott, I believe you have a question.
maybe two, maybe, Chair, if I may be as bold. Page 41. Looking at the permanent staff figure of 445 under 4.1, I don't know what the figure has been, whether it comes in and out around that figure. The question I would ask around that is, are we a competitive council? Because over a number of years, we have been at risk of losing things like planning officers to other councils who pay their staff more. So just wondering if that's a good figure that we need to note as councillors, or whether it's something we still need to watch from a competitive point of view. That's my first point. My second point is on page 44 and lists a lot of positive general fund revenue stuff. If a resident is sitting asking this question tonight, what answer would be given to them if they would say that, how are things moving along with the Central Winchester Regeneration Project, the Levelling Up, the local plan, etc., etc.? Are we, in this last year, as we present this paper to Cabinet soon, and obviously rubber stamp it at full council, no doubt, are we on course to really hit our mark on this fantastic list of projects on the 11.2 list there? Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to pick this one up?
Apologise. I'm quite happy to pick that one up. We are on course, and we're due to come to the Cabinet Regen Committee with an update in October that will give you the full update for the Central Winchester Regeneration Project. Yep, local plan has only just been to cabinet with an alignment for dates. So that remains on track. And obviously we've had some new news this week around neutrality that could support the dates we've put in. Gives us a little bit more certainty. So good news. Thank you.
And I think there was also a question on the workforce, and the workforce isn't specifically dealt with in this paper. It's just for information. There have been, there was significant pay inflation cost in here that hadn't been budgeted for, which made a difference. And that was partly around bringing things in line to make us more competitive. But there is a workforce paper going to Audit and Governance at the end of next month. There is the staff survey, and so if you need more detail on that, you'll be able to find it for the Audit and Governance meeting.
Mrs. Keys.
The only thing I would add to that is that we made provision in this year's budget for an increase to the pay brackets for staff across the organisation, so that they were able to go up an additional increment that they wouldn't have been if they were at the top of their grade. So it is something that the Executive Leadership Board does keep under review, because clearly we're keen to be a competitive council and attract the very best talent in all of our services.
Councillor Pett.
Thank you, Chair. Sort of follow on to the last question, actually, on the increase of 14 full-time equivalent. Is that a good news story because we've managed to fill gaps, or is that an increase in the council's requirement?
Could you show me where that is in the paper? But I don't know.
Sorry, it's the same section, page 41, 4.1.
We come back on that question, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Pett, I'll come back to you. Will you come back to us later in the meeting, or will you come back to us? Okay, many
Okay,
thanks.
thank you.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, 13.4E talks about employees agency, and obviously we are spending money on agency staff. And I think we all supported in council the increment that Mrs. Keys has just referred to. Is there a requirement though, because we have had some sort of gaps and changes staff wise? Is there a requirement for a broader sort of strategic review of whether we've got our scales in the right place to attract the very best people, so that we can have permanent staff rather than having to employ the more perhaps expensive agency personnel, because you're flagging that as an overspend in the outturn report. It's just a matter of, how we're handling recruitment going forward, and making sure that we have the very best resources to deliver what we need to do. Thank you.
Mrs. Keys.
Thank you, Chair. As part of the Transformation Challenge 2025 programme that we've got, where we're looking at reviewing the way we deliver all of our services to address our budget gap, certainly looking at where we spend on agency staff, why that is, understanding it and understanding if there's changes we need to make. That's a key work stream within our TT25 programme.
Thank you. That's very good to hear. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, if I may, on page 49 in the one-off revenue budgets, looking at bike storage and other measures, I'm not sure what's included in other measures, but there's a big chunk of that that's rolled over to 23-24, and given the encouragement to leave your cars at home, upping the car parking charges, my concern is, why hasn't this been delivered, and is there a guarantee it will be in 23-24 with that budget?
Thank you, Chair. with all of these one-off projects, the budgets are created, and it's not always possible for us to forecast when the spend will be. So we put them all in one financial year, and sometimes it's not possible to deliver all of that. Sometimes it may never have been possible to deliver it all of it within a short window. At the time. And on that specific project, yes, we're looking to complete those works this financial year, so within 23-24.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, could I ask a question, please, about 2H homelessness, where the outturn is very different from the original budget and the revised budget. And in the narrative on page 50, it talks about uncommitted balances which require future spending. We did look at some homelessness budget earlier on this year, but obviously important given our requirements as an authority to understand what needs to be done to ensure that we use that money effectively, or is that budget simply not the right number going forward? But as I say, on page 50 it talks about future spending proposals, so I'm assuming more's coming, but I'd be grateful for clarity. Thank you.
Yeah, so on that one, the reason there isn't as much carry forward as there is surplus is because we would take any underspend from this year and put it back into the reserve. So it's absolutely still targeted at that homelessness work that's coming forward in 23-24.
And will that be ring fenced for that particular category? That's not just going into general pot, as it were.
No, absolutely, it's ring fenced in the homelessness reserve.
Thank you.
Councillor Reach.
Thank you. On page 47, 13.3, the blob number 5, they just ask about the additional £165,000 of funding for Park and Ride from Hampshire County Council, please. Why that arose and what it's been spent on. Thank you.
Yes, that is a grant which came from central government via Hampshire County Council to support public transport and the impact that COVID had on public transport. Obviously, we lost revenue from our Park and Ride operation, and that is some remaining balance that they've passed to us just to offset the impact of lost income from our Park and Ride in the COVID recovery period.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, regarding section 13.2 on page 46, the other income, which is a favourable variance of 306,000. And I know that that's due to explained on a later page. It's a build-up of smaller variances, licensing, state service income, and ring-fence government grants. My question is, my understanding is that means that's effectively a temporary or one-off windfall payment rather than being a permanent sort of increase in our revenue stream that can be factored into future budgets. Is my understanding of that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's a one-off windfall for that financial year. Yes, it's not an increase in baseline income.
Any further questions on the main body? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, the never-ending conundrum of this wonderful building, the Guildhall, on page 47, the costs and the income are always just too far apart. What is our intention? Because we're just carrying that ongoing, and many administrations have faced that same dilemma. What is our intention to try and actually then narrow the gap on the cost and the income for the Guildhall? Thank you.
Yeah, we've made extensive changes to the way the Guildhall operates, and we've narrowed that gap significantly. And in fact, the outturn this year was less of a loss than we budgeted for. A lot of the costs are fixed costs to do with operating the building, but we've minimised our running costs, employee costs, cleaning costs, those sorts of things. But again, I'll just refer to our TC25 programme, where looking at the future operation of the Guildhall again is one of our key projects. So we'll be looking at that in more detail.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the main body before we come to the appendices? Councillor Horrocks.
Chair, it's always a tough one because we have amazing monuments and historic assets. We put money in and then we never seem to be able to get the money away. It makes the comment here that, you know, we've had delays, and I know we've had issues historically with the sort of authorities that we need to get approval from. How close are we to getting some of that work completed and that money spent proactively and positively on things that I know people want us to look after well? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think this point was raised before, so we had an opportunity to go and investigate it. There have been some difficulties in terms of engagement with Historic England and gaining agreement to the works that will be undertaken on some historical monuments, but I can report that we're confident that we've reached agreement with Historic England on the approach to some of the works now, so we can confident they will be proceeding.
Thank you.
Councillor Todd, welcome to the table. Have you joined us to answer a question or just in case?
As the cabinet member for asset management, amongst other things, yeah, I wasn't entirely sure how widely the information that we'd have a very productive meeting with Historic England to talk about, particularly the Buttercross and Hyde Abbey Gateway. So I've been in touch with the relevant officer about that. So I can only agree with what Mr. Hendy said, but it is good news. We are making progress, but as has been talked about before, the process of getting agreement to a detailed plan of action and the details of how that plan is executed with Historic England for what are very valuable and important ancient monuments in the city is far from straightforward. But officers are being very persistent and committed to making it happen, and we are making very good progress.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Any other questions on the main body of the report? No? Okay, so we'll come on to Appendix 1 then. Appendix 1 is on page 63. Does anybody have any questions on Appendix 1? No? Appendix 2 then on page 65. Does anybody have any specific questions on Appendix 2? No? We're on to Appendix 3 then on page 67. Does anybody have any questions on Appendix 3 with the recurring budgets? No, Appendix 4 then. Does anybody have any specific questions on Appendix 4? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. It was specifically on a very hyper-local issue, the Bishop's Waltham footpath and cycle link, whether at a later stage any clarity could be gained just to find out which specific cycle link that is. There's 3 projects ongoing in Bishop's Waltham at the moment, connections to Smallmore, Botley and an internal footpath and cycleway, so sort of clarity on that would be appreciated at a later date.
Councillor Cutler, is that something you pick up with Councillor Williams separately? Many thanks. Any further questions on Appendix 4? No. Appendix 5 then, which we have on page 73. Questions on there? Okay, Appendix, oh, Councillor Reach.
Sorry, I was a bit slow there. That was my fault. Thank you. There's provision for money. Obviously, I immediately can't see where I was looking. Oh yes, 4th row from the bottom for the goods shed, Barfield Close. If you'll forgive me, another hyper-local issue. Just curious if we could have an update on that project, please, because as I understand, it's on pause, and hence why there is some still provision there. Thank you.
Councillor Todd.
gearing up, but I was just, I was his backup.
So over to Mr Hendy then. You don't wish to answer, Councillor Todd?
The business case that was being looked at got hit by the sort of financial chaos of Trussonomics and everything else that was going on. And as we know, it is very hard to get business cases away through the combination of out of control inflation in construction costs, increased interest rates, and just general economic mayhem. So that particular redevelopment project is on hold, although the planning application is underway, and I think will be taken through to show what would be possible if the economic circumstances were more favourable. In the meantime, we are negotiating with a potential tenant who is able to take the site in its current form, and that is likely to be our short-term scenario. I don't think we want to leave it as a sort of rubble-strewn former railway marshalling yard area forever, with an old goods shed in it forevermore. I think it's undoubtedly the case that there can be a better use for it, but we have a good meanwhile use in the interim, which I think is our lead in terms of how that site will be used in the medium term. I hope Mr Hendy agrees.
Thank you. Did you want to?
Situation, obviously without the political comments, which he has no view on.
Yes, I'm just curious whether Mr Hendy would have said that in a way in which I would have preferred, actually. Thank you. Any other questions on Appendix 5? I think we were on Appendix 5, Councillor.
Well, Chair, it's a sort of a slightly more generic rather than a specific line on Appendix 5. But regarding the assets, and in fact, Councillor Todd just mentioned potentially having a meanwhile use for a property. How many properties do we have at the moment that are empty that we are not gaining revenue from? I look around the city and I can see many that I believe we own that are not generating income. How many do we have that we have perhaps long-term aspirations for, but the business plan doesn't quite work at this point, but we have meanwhile uses? We did that obviously on some of the central Winchester site with the accommodation that we offered. How many do we have that we could be generating income from that we're not currently? Thank you.
I think Mr Handy will be able to provide a better and possibly less inflammatory answer to this. The term you used was projects that we could be generating income from. So we do have some buildings where, for whatever reason, there is a lot of cost involved in bringing up to a legally lettable standard. And again, because of the current situation with interest rates and construction costs, it's very hard to make those business cases work. And we're looking at what our options can be in those particular situations. Similarly, there are some sites that are vacant at the moment where we are in the process of finalising letting. So some of the ones that would be well known, there is a question of whether planning permission might be needed, and then we have a building like Friarsgate, for example, the medical centre. The reason we're not letting that is we're about to demolish it, so that is also an asset that has no income coming in on it. So if you exclude all of the ones that there is major capital investment needed, there is surprisingly few. I'm not entirely sure that.
Shall we go to Mr Hendy?
Yeah, I mean, I have a list in front of me, but I could.
Mr Hendy?
Thank you, Chair. The answer to that question is on page 179. At the moment, the total estimated rental income for vacant property is £174,000. Vacant property under offer, £129,000. Rental value of vacant property still to be let, £45,000. That equates to just 1% of total rental income at the moment.
I think you might be looking at the same report. So we have 14 buildings, or 14 property assets at the moment out of 370, which are vacant, but some of those are vacant because it is not possible to economically redevelop them at the current time. So 3 of them are deliberately vacant pending redevelopment, and as said, a significant number, 9 of them have been actively marketed, and we, as said, we do have £129,000 a year of vacant property under offer.
So can I just clarify, Councillor Todd, I mean, if we just take the registry office for an example, that, you know, potentially could be repurposed, but it may be a question of planning or whether it's suitable. Is that the type of building that we have that, you know, in the current climate is hard to settle into a new revenue stream, as it were, as an example of
The registry office is under offer.
Sorry,
It's under offer.
fantastic.
Before we come on to any further questions, Councillor Pett, there's an answer to your question. Mrs. Evans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I managed to find out some detail. The question was, is it an increase in the establishment of 14 FTE? And yes, it is. What I don't have here is information as to the grade of those positions, or obviously the salary, and if there's been a salary increase. I am aware that, and again, whether those positions are permanent or temporary, I am aware there have been many positions that have been filled through funding of temporary positions with regard to certain projects and work streams that we've been working on. So that's the detail that I have here at hand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Reach.
Thank you. And further to Councillor Horrell's question about vacant properties, I'll just check that 59 Colebrook Street is on our list, since it adjoins this building and is in a very prominent location. Good. So we haven't forgotten about it. Excellent. Thank you.
Any further questions on Appendix 5? No, Appendix 6 then. Do we have any questions on Appendix 6? And that's it for the appendices. Do we have any other questions that we haven't covered off in any of the other areas? No. Any debates on this paper? Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you once again to officers. I think Councillor Cutler said, and you, Mrs. Keys, it's sort of been a turbulent year. I think we're grateful for the monies we've received externally. We've clearly applied for and received a lot of government investment into the council, which is all positive. And you have an outturn that you were positive about with all those movements. It's clear the economic climate is impacting some of our activities and what we're able to do according to our schedule and how we had wanted to phase those. But helpful this evening to understand the commitment to much of which is already in the plan and that people wish to see come forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Any other debates on this paper? No. So the only point I have to take away here is that Councillor Cutler's to confirm with Councillor Williams which cycle and transport route is being referred to in the paper. Other than that, are we agreed that we've scrutinised this paper and to move on to the performance panel? Yes, agreed. Thank you. So the performance panel, as we know, meets, there's a date wrong in this paper. It says met on the 22nd of May 2023, and that is not when they met. So if we could correct that, that would be great. To scrutinise the attached report and the associated appendices. The chair of that performance panel is Councillor Horrell. Councillor Horrell, I will pass over to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and hopefully the officers can just change that date on the Scrutiny Committee report under agenda item 8. The panel met on the 21st of August, in fact, and reviewed the document in full. It was the first time that we had looked at the new indicators against the council plan priorities. So that was a very informative session. Matthew Watson very kindly has written up the notes from that meeting, and we have several things that we want to just make sure that are raised and the Scrutiny Committee are aware of. Some of them have been addressed already. Grateful for officers coming back on many of them, but there are some that are still outstanding. And obviously, as you imagine, as you're looking at a new report, we had discussions about ranges of numbers, or should we have a specific, and the way the report was actually presented. So under item 43, there are a number of outstanding points to be addressed that were raised in the meeting, and there were some to consider whether we would nuance some of the targets to give better clarity. One was, for example, on fly tipping, that we should have the completion time, not just necessarily how many we record, but actually how quickly we fulfill the requirement to collect everything, and whether that was possible. So there are some requests in 43, and a couple that were not highlighted there. So one of them was, in fact, under item 35, the KPI concerning speed of fly tipping clear up. Could that be considered? We thought that would be a helpful measure, given many wards are impacted by that. And also the HFA 3, a target to be applied to that. There were a couple of places in the report where the targets had yet to be set. We understand officers were still working on that, but I think as we go to Q2, we need to make sure that we do have the targets clearly set, which obviously have to come from officers with Cabinet's agreement. So that is there noted, Chair. So we did ask for some better clarification on the RAG status. There were some comments on how the RAG indicators were on the report, and some confusion about whether they were red or green or amber. So just making sure that we're all really clear, because the RAG status is a really helpful way of looking as to what's out of kilter. And we focused on the ones that were red and amber rather than green, obviously. But it was very helpful to look at it, and also the historical data that has been added. So we're grateful to officers for adding that, because we can look back at previous periods to understand that. So specifically for you, Chair, we would want you to support the fact that some targets need to be set for some of the indicators. That's in hand. The RAG status, particularly on TCE1, and we were discussing with Mrs. Adey what the RAG status actually meant in that instance, so that we're all really clear. We thought that potentially some targets we discussed with Mr. Hendy on retrofit, for example, should we have a range, or are we going with the specific number, the 533, given that we know there are movements there. We talked at length about a number of the carbon neutrality indicators, but obviously there's a cabinet report coming in October, which presumably Councillor Lerney will be bringing, which will give clarity on all those strands of work. Because at the moment, that the level of detail is going to come from that piece of work rather than what we're seeing currently. And also there was some clarification requested, and I think the directors are looking at that as to what comes forward to scrutiny and the committees, and where various elements are reviewed. We talked about the movement strategy, for example, but we understand something's going to in the autumn. So just to understand where some of those discussions are going so that we don't duplicate those. And I think just finally, Chair, in the new way of working, if we could try and round out the outstanding elements, a number have already been done, but from this report, so that it doesn't sort of just roll on to the future, get those questions answered and back out to everyone, that would be helpful. So, Chair, it was a pretty full discussion. I hope officers felt it was useful. It was certainly helpful to have the main officers in the room on the key areas that people were asking questions about. Mrs. Robbins was there. That was really positive this time, as her area had quite a number of questions, Mr. Hendy and Mrs. Knight. So I think we've grasped that, but there's still, if any panel members here have a different view of the document or the comments made, then please raise them. But I think Matthew did a great job of recording what we said on the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hurrell. Councillor Pett, you wanted to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of becoming a bit of a stuck record on fly tipping, thank the officers for the update from the performance panel, where they've said reports of fly tipping incidents normally forwarded to the contractor within 1 working day of receipt, and then the contractor has between 2 and 10 days to clear them. I would just observe that reality in my ward doesn't reflect that. Now, I wonder whether that is because of a process problem within the reporting system. I mean, there's some anecdotal evidence that when people are using the reporting system, they get to the end of it and they think they've actually clicked the submit and it hasn't actually gone through. That may be one explanation. It may be that the officer dealing with fly tipping is perhaps rather overwhelmed with the number of fly tip incidents we're getting in the rural communities, and you know, there just isn't the capacity there. But I think I would need to record that lived experience is that fly tips, which people believe they have reported, are not getting cleared to those timescales. I welcome any further follow-up from the officers concerned on that issue.
Councillor Pett, would you separately be able to provide some specific examples for investigation?
Yes, certainly.
Many thanks. I've noted that. Councillor Cutler.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've spoken to Councillor Pett at some length about this and done some preliminary investigation. I think there are possibly problems with possibly the time limits with ID Verde aren't being monitored, or may monitored quite as tightly as they might be. But I think this point about, and it's a point that's concerned me about the app, that when you get to the end of the fly tipping report, there is a big box that says save, and there's a very tiny button that says submit. And when you press save, you save it on your phone, but it's not sending. And I think there's a possibility that people think they've reported and they haven't. And I do think we do need to resolve that as soon as possible. I understand that there is further improvements in other aspects of reporting through to ID Verde, that the ID Verde staff themselves, as they pick up, as they travel around, can notify of other incidents that they see, which I think is going to be quite an important aspect of it. But you know, I will undertake to work with Mr. Hendy and with Campbell and just see if there is a bottleneck anywhere there that we might need to put a little bit more resource into, because it's clearly
a concern. It's certainly a concern in my ward, and I know in some of the rural wards there is a problem. So I think that particular metric of the speed at which tips are cleared after reporting is actually quite a good one. We can't really influence the number. The absolute number is, we'd need to know what they are, but it's not a KPI that we can really influence. Prosecutions, we had a metric some time ago of successful prosecutions, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because if you're really cautious and only prosecute once, but it's successful, then that's 100%. That's brilliant, but it's just not many. But if you ask for lots of prosecutions, that may not be good either, as just sheer numbers. So I think that clear up rate is quite a good one that we could look at as being a key performance indicator.
Can I just support that? I think that was really the essence of the discussion at the panel, that it was about clear up rate. What is the SLA with the contractor, and what we think we're experiencing in reality, and whether the SLA is appropriate, and whether we've got a different expectation from what is being delivered. So I think that's absolutely the heart of what was discussed, and hopefully can have some focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pett and Councillor Hurrell. I just want to add thank you to the performance panel for giving this such due diligence. I think I speak for all of us on the committee that your feedback regarding the targets and the relevance of the reg status, some additional targets as we've just discussed, including clean-up rate, should be a KPI. So I think I speak on behalf of all of us that we'd support these additional targets in the paper. Councillor Wallace, I believe you wanted to speak on this paper. No, Wallace. This time, Councillor Cutler, I am not wrong.
Thank you, Chair. First comment I wanted to make was thank you. I think there are big improvements in the performance monitoring report this quarter compared to the ones I've seen last year. The layout, particularly in the content and layout of appendices 1 to 3, are much clearer than, in my opinion, they're much clearer than they have been than they were through last year. So thank you. I know that takes a lot of effort, so thank you very much for doing that. Just a couple of questions on Appendix 4 on the carbon programme. Activities under transport, domestic energy, land and land use have all been through council policy committees, business and housing, or the health and environment policy committee. When will the activities being performed under the commercial energy heading go before a policy committee? The second question was on the please can members receive a briefing on the HCC, the Hampshire County carbon assessment tool that it states is going to be used in future council processes and reports, which is on page 142. I understand these are quite detailed questions, so that's why I did send them to officers beforehand. So yeah. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. If these were sent to officers previously, are they being responded to offline? You can respond now, did you say? Okay, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. So moving to the first item, bringing forward the commercial energy to the policy committee. This work falls under the Green Economic Development Strategy. That's where that piece of work sits. So we have the policy for that, and it's actually a part of the delivery plan for our next steps. So that's not currently on the agenda to come to business and housing, but that's where it would go if there was something specific you wanted to look at and call to a policy committee. The second item, the Hampshire tool in the committee reports, is still a work in progress, and we will brief as soon as we've got that tool ready. That one's still ongoing.
Thank you, Ms Sadie, and thank you, Councillor Wallace, for your questions. Did anybody else have any other questions or anything they'd like? Councillor Reach?
Thank you. It's a question about the proposed hydrogenated vegetable oil, which is referenced in both Appendix 1 and Appendix 4. And also the linked comment about exploring hydrogen as well as an alternative to diesel. Could I just check the appraisal approach we've taken, because both of those fuels are very problematic, and while they may be notionally carbon neutral at the tailpipe, hydrogenated vegetable oil is particularly bad for indirect land use change, and in fact quite possibly just displacing diesel to be used elsewhere. And similarly on hydrogen, I don't think there is any utility scale green hydrogen production in our region. So my question is, what carbon appraisal would the council do of those schemes, and can I just get some assurance that we're not going to steam headlong into this because at the tailpipe of the bin lorry there is no carbon emission, or at least it's neutral? Thank you.
Councillor Cutler, that looks like a you question.
Is it? Well, in which case it's one that I will take away and respond to if possible. But I think Mrs. Adie's got a response.
Help a little, but we've got Andy at the back of the room there. So as far as I'm aware, the work is end to end. So we're aware we've got to look at where we're getting it from before we appraise it and use it in there. But we're using through our supply chain. So it's through our contractors and where they get the fuel from. It's not something we're sourcing direct. So, but we're definitely aware of that. We're not cited on that being part of the appraisal. Have I got that right?
Yes, you have. We're making sure that it's all accredited. We're talking to other people that have already done it, like Portsmouth City Council, and there is an accredited source. There's an agency for checking that it is as well. So yeah, we're very much aware of that, and we're going through all those checks. And
thank you, Ms. Lady and Mr. Hickman.
Thank you for putting me on the spot.
Sorry, Councillor Cutler. I did suspect you'd say it was one to take away, but I thought it was one for you to take away. Do we have any other questions on this performance panel? Thanks. No. So the feedback for scrutiny on page 184, I think we've already run through. I've also added on here fly tipping targets not met for clearing fly tips. To take away, to look at reviewing the button to make sure that the submit button is clearer than the save button, and it makes it clear that even if you've saved, perhaps a pop-up comes up to say this has not been submitted would be helpful. Sorry, Councillor? Yes, do you wish to submit? Yeah, that would be useful too. And that the clean-up rate should be a KPI within the report. So aside from that, do we have any other comments or feedback? No. Thank you again, Councillor Hurrell and the performance panel. Oh, apologies. I didn't in my writing down of all the points that we have to take away, the correction of the date from May to August. So I shall make a note of that. Thank you. Right, coming on to the next item on our agenda. I would like to thank Councillor Lerney and Mr. Hickman, if you could both come forward. So I requested that they come along to talk about public conveniences, which has been quite controversial, to ask if they could come along and give us a brief insight into what is forthcoming so that we would be able to ask questions should we wish. So Councillor Lerney, I believe you're introducing first.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Last year, listening to comment and concern about our public toilets, it became clear that we couldn't keep taking a piecemeal and reactive approach to our toilet provision. As a result, we set up a public toilet task force led by Councillor Gordon Smith, who of course has now moved on to become Deputy Mayor, in order to review the situation and drive change. We've carried out a number of pieces of work, including bringing in the British Toilet Association to do a report, carried out full condition surveys, and these have helped us establish the extent of what was needed. For clarity about priorities and potential ways forward in the context of the level of pressure on our council budget, we have produced a public toilet improvement strategy and are proposing that the council undertake a major programme of improvements and refurbishments in line with that strategy. So I'm going to hand over to Andy Hickman, our head of programme, to talk through some of the detail.
Yeah, I'll give you some of the, better put that on. Yeah, thank you. I'll give you some of the backgrounds. Matthew, could you move on to the first slide? Thank you. So this is just a list of the facilities that we currently have. We have 11 public toilets across the district, one of which is currently closed at the moment. That was Middlebrook Street. That was closed because of antisocial behaviour issues and remains closed until for the foreseeable future, basically. Now, these toilets are open mostly from 8 till 8. Some in the district are open 24/7. And the park and ride ones open from 6:30 in the morning. Next one, please. So this is just some details of the capital expenditure that we've spent over the last few years. So this is basically for improvement works rather than running costs. As you can see there was quite a major refurbishment at the toilet in Alresford last year. And then previously to that, you go back to 2017-18, where we spent any money. That was Market Lane. And then 15-16 in Wickham, and then back as far as 9-10 for these. So that was the major Abbey Gardens work that we did for that set of facilities. Yes. And in terms of running costs, we kind of split this up a bit for you. So annual repair costs, so these are when we have to go in and make repairs as a result of things failing or things being broken. And that varies between sort of £30,000 and £70,000 a year, and obviously depends very much on things like antisocial behaviour and vandalism. So those costs do vary from year to year. And then in terms of annual running costs for all of those 11 facilities, it's around £200,000 a year, and that covers cleaning, very basic maintenance and utility costs, and a few other bits and pieces. And of that money, we currently recover about £62,000 a year, which is contributions from town and parishes and the Winchester Town Forum. We've also been doing some usage surveys in terms of having some sensors in all the facilities to see how many people are using them. This is provisional data because the surveys are ongoing, but we've had some really interesting results. We've got an average of about 900 people per day, for example, using the Market Lane facilities, which is 24,000 people a month using those. So that we were quite surprised by the amount of people using those toilets. And then at the other extreme, we've got the toilets in Chesil Car Park, which have about 50 people using them a day. And that averages out at about 2,800 people per day using those 11 sets of facilities. And we clean those depending upon the usage, and the heavier used ones are cleaned 5 times a day, and the less used ones one or two times a day. We've gathered some information on complaints just to give you sort of the context. So these are formal complaints that we get over a given year. And I think it's worth noting that we had 76,000 people per month using these toilets. So this does, to me, these seem quite low, but nevertheless still of concern. And obviously, there may be people using them who are less than impressed when they go in there, but don't necessarily make a formal complaint. So that's what we're working with, and the complaints are usually around sort of dirty or unclean toilets, lack of soap or toilet rolls, and quite a few around antisocial behaviour and drug paraphernalia, needles found in the toilets. And we found a common pattern is a lot of these are at the weekends when the usage is particularly high. So as Councillor Lenny said, we've developed an improvement strategy which is going to Cabinet next week. I'll just quickly run through some headlines from that. The strategy, the aim is there, which is that residents and visitors to the district have access to toilets in key locations which are comfortable, clean, safe, well maintained and cater for the whole community. And that breaks down to objectives. And I'd say you can see these in full in the cabinet paper, which was published yesterday, but around availability, that's having provision which is provided either directly by us or in partnership at key locations where it's needed. Sustainability, so we're aiming to deliver these in an environmentally responsible manner where it's practically possible. And obviously some of these are aims we haven't achieved yet. These are some of these we are working towards. Inclusivity is really important, meeting all the needs of people. So we have a range of facilities for people that have special needs, for example. They have to be as safe and free from antisocial behaviour as possible. And that is a real challenge. And we have to consider cost effectiveness. These facilities have to be affordable. And we have a number of budget issues at the moment, which we have to bear in mind. And the final one on there, which is really important, is cleanliness. And we want to deliver that in line with the level of usage for each facility and the expectations that people quite rightly have. In terms of key issues, we've flagged finance. Obviously, this is in the context of having to make budget savings, and any improvements that we make or extra provision that we make to public conveniences, public toilets, will inevitably cost us more annual revenue funding. Antisocial behaviour, we flagged because this is really difficult to tackle. We have regular antisocial behaviour issues in our public conveniences, and we have a lot of vandalism. We had a spate recently where 3 or 4 of the toilets were quite badly damaged over one particular day. We have no idea how it happened or who did it, but we're dealing with that almost on a daily basis. Cleanliness, I've already mentioned, and the cabinet paper that's being published and considered next week does talk about this in terms of what we're intending to do. And that revolves around using some of our reserve funding to do something over the next year. And we're looking at how we can best deliver that with our current contractor. And the other big issue for us is changing places provision. These are special provision for severely disabled people. And we do have a gap in the city centre where we don't have one of these. We do have some at Winchester Sport and Leisure Park and other places like the Winchester Arc and Whiteley Shopping Centre has one, but we don't have one in the city centre. So part of our aim is to deliver that if we can, and we're looking at partnership opportunities to do that. And finally, next steps. We've mentioned the improvement strategy, which is going to Cabinet next week. We're continuing to gather data, which will be complete during September. As I mentioned, we're looking very closely at cleaning and enhanced cleaning and monitoring and how we can do that. We did appoint a street scene officer last year who's been really effective in going around and checking the toilets and working with the contractor to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do and address issues as they arrive. So we want to make best use of that resource. And we're looking very carefully at the usage data to see where we need to deploy our cleaning and enhanced cleaning in particular and how we might best do that. We've also identified that we need further discussions with the parish and town councils. So we've had one round of discussions with them. We want to have another chat to see how we can best manage those facilities out in the district. I mean, we feel that they'd be best managed locally. If parishes have got existing contracts, for example, for cleaning, then it'd be better if it's combined with those rather than our contractor having to drive out to the district. But as I say, that's subject to more discussion and see if we can find a better way of doing it. And we intend to develop a detailed action plan and then implement that once the strategy is agreed. And that's sort of considering all the issues that we haven't quite got to the bottom of yet, like antisocial behaviour, cleaning, demand, whether we need more facilities, particularly in Winchester, because the British Toilet Association did identify that we don't have enough supply based on the demand. So whether we reopen, for example, Middlebrook Street toilets, and the change in place facility that I've mentioned, how we're going to deliver that after we've had further discussions. And the final point there is how we address the antisocial behaviour and how we monitor it, how we can work in partnership to try and address that. But that is a big issue for us. That's the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hickman, for that very informative presentation. And I'm aware it was at quite short notice, so I really appreciate you coming along and giving us that. Does anybody have any questions on the information that's been given to us today? Councillor Williams.
It was just in regards to the complaints. They seem, compared to the casework that we get, or informal comments from residents, the formal complaints seem very low in comparison. I was just wondering if you could sort of expand on that. Is that just an off-the-cuff email to the council, or is that somebody who's gone through the official complaints procedure?
The ones we listed there are official complaints, yes. So that there are probably other people who are dissatisfied as well, but that's the ones that are registered as formal complaints.
I was going to ask about complaints, so just following on from that, I suspect an awful lot of people complain to the parishes. And of course, Denmead, my area, I'm aware that they already have this where they do the cleaning and the opening and closing on behalf of Winchester, so it's sort of that shared responsibility. So I would presume, although Denmead was 0 complaints, I do get several grovels. They probably go to the parishes as opposed to coming to Winchester. I'd be interested to see how many additional complaints that then brings in.
Yeah, at the moment, our contractor, the City Council's contractor, does clean all the district toilets, including Denmead, actually. But they do alert us when there's problems. But we don't get so many in the district, I think, because we don't get so much antisocial behaviour in the districts, and they're less used. But we do still get some, yes, and we do. Bishop's Waltham were contacting us recently about issues out there, which was actually antisocial behaviour, but that is quite rare. But you're right; those would be additional.
You just mentioned usage. It was something I'd noted down, and it's probably too much detail that I really don't want to know. But I was curious how you come upon the usage figures. I mean, is it by the number of toilet roll squares used? I'm just curious.
Fortunately, it's with the use of electronic sensors. So we do have a specialist firm that's been brought in specially to do these counts with their own equipment. And we can break it down for you, not only how many people are using it per day, but per hour.
It's sort of reminiscent of the day I got locked in one of those toilets on the train, and the person came across a speaker and said, excuse me, madam, just stay calm. And I suddenly had a moment where I thought, how does he know I'm madam? So it was just one of those moments. I just wanted to double check. Anyway, Councillor Horrell, you had a question.
How do you follow that? A couple of questions, actually, Andy, if I may. In the report, I read the cabinet report, you're prioritising, and clearly because of the throughput of people, the city first, but you don't say very specifically in there when you're going to go to the market towns. You say you'll talk to the town and parish councils, but obviously the 4 market town facilities will want to know where they are on that programme. Do you think the lack of public access to the Guildhall now has had any impact? Because obviously Guildhall used to be used quite a lot by the public who came into the cafe and the like. Because that's now not a sort of public thoroughfare in the same way, has that changed any of the usage elements? And then in terms of the money that you put into the cabinet report, a lot of that is on obviously upgrading the facilities, and I'm not challenging that at all. But actually, many of the complaints, and I think I was here in a cabinet meeting when we had some people coming to raise with the cabinet their concerns about the cleanliness. That actually some of this is actually about the frequency and the cleanliness of the facility, not necessarily the fabric of the facility, although obviously they may be linked because you may have better equipment and the like, which helps. But just trying to understand that, because when I see the cabinet report, I see part of the story, but I don't see that whole picture that you've outlined this evening. Thank you.
because this is the first time we've got such detailed usage figures. In fact, I'm not aware of any research we've actually done into usage in the past. We haven't really got a clear comparison. I mean, certainly like you, I think we all feel that a lot of people did use the Guildhall toilets informally, because certainly those of us who knew they were there knew they were likely to be the nicest toilets in the area when the building was open, and clearly now it is a closed facility. So it's unclear about that, but I think certainly the feeling of a lot of us is that that has had some impact. But on the other hand, when we look at how heavily Market Lane and Abbey Gardens are used, clearly, you know, that is only likely to be playing a small part. Around the cleaning, there are two aspects to that, one of which is that, you know, even minor antisocial behaviour, you know, throwing toilet paper around, you know, messing about with sinks and things can have a major impact on the cleanliness. So antisocial behaviour definitely has an impact there, as well as regularity of cleaning. But clearly we do have a limited budget, and employing people to clean is very expensive. One of the things that is in the strategy around cleanliness is looking at, when we refurbish our toilets, making sure we make them quicker and easier to clean, because that's definitely a factor. If we can get them cleaned in 3/4 of the time, clearly, and a lot of them will be able to do more cleaning for the same price. And that's one of the reasons why we're keen to explore with the parish and town councils whether they might have local people who could do the cleaning, rather than us having somebody spending half an hour driving out of Winchester, or in the case of Denmead, an hour driving out of Winchester and back again just to do one toilet clean.
Thank you. You mentioned refurbishment. It was something I noted down. Did you say the British Public Convenience Association earlier?
The British Toilet Association, which is a professional association who came out and inspected all our toilets and made some recommendations around that based on national best practice and what they've seen elsewhere.
I wondered if in their best practice advice they had we'd expect toilets to be refurbished every 10 years, every 5 years, every 15 years. Was there a general recommendation? Because looking at some of those dates, they were quite significantly far back.
I think it's very dependent on usage. You know, and when we've got one set of toilets being used 18 times more than another, you would expect it to wear out quicker. But clearly there are aspects which generally just degrade over time and need looking at. Some of that though often comes down to the routine maintenance, and we're looking at trying to do that better and more often, because again, going back to how people feel about toilets, if you've got a leaky tap in the toilet, that makes you feel like it's not as well looked after as it should be. So dealing with all of those little issues better is also something we're looking at, as well as the cleaning.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Having also read the cabinet paper for next week on toilets, on section 5, and you've mentioned already today, that you're going to have further discussions with the parish and town councils. Just wondering if there would be an estimated timetable on when sort of, if the parish councils, whether they do cleaning themselves or not, whether refurbishment could be sort of added into a timetable so that the parishes can feed back to residents, say, 12 months time we'll have new toilets, or is this further discussion needed to sort of clarify whether they need refurbishment?
I think part of it is around the level of need for refurbishment and what it would be sensible for us as a city council to invest in those toilets. I mean, for example, if a parish council was willing to take over a toilet in its entirety, then we would put the money in to make sure everything was absolutely right before that happened as part of the arrangement. On the other hand, we might just do a quick refurb to bring them up to the basic standard as indicated by the condition surveys. So that's one of the reasons why we need to have further discussions.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? No? Thank you both very much for coming along this evening. I really appreciate it. It was very useful insight for us all. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is to note the work programme for 2023-24. Are you happy to note that? Okay. The next item 11 is to look at the latest forward plan of key decisions, and the forward plan that we have is September's forward plan, but in the pack, but we were issued with October's forward plan last Friday, so it was too late for this paper. So if we could look at both together, if I have any comments on either of those, September or October's, if you need a moment to dig out October's and look at it, then please do let me know. Do you have any comments on either of those? Councillor Horrell?
Well, Chair, I see little point in even looking at September because the cabinet papers are published and we should have, if we had anything that we wanted to raise, we should have been doing that this evening. So you've obviously asked for the public convenience or strategy to come forward. My comment is that there are things in the October forward plan that maybe this committee should be looking at, but of course we're now not meeting until November. So the way the forward plan comes forward and elements that we might want to review, and how they get onto the agenda, because I noticed on the work plan we have several things sort of pending, but we don't have them planned in. I just wondered whether that's a conversation you should take offline with the monitoring officer, or just to look at how we get the syncing of the items that might need to come forward, or whether we have to have special meetings, as we did perhaps earlier this year on the local plan, for example, when we know that certain things will be available. But it just seems at the moment we're slightly out of sync, because as I say, I don't see any point in commenting on September tonight, because that moment has passed. And obviously we didn't issue October for this meeting, although it came out, we could have sent it as a supplementary, obviously. So I think it's a question of the governance piece of how this works in tandem with Cabinet, and how we can better coordinate the papers. Thank you, Chair.
I've noted that. Thank you, Councillor Horrell. There was a discussion that I had with Chief Executive regarding bringing car parking charges in the same sort of vein as we have with public conveniences, because due to the publicity that there's been on that, but I was advised that because that's too far in the future, that was not able to come forward. So I completely agree. It would have been really useful to have had sight of what was coming as part of the papers. We could probably go through it and call it in today. So I have made a note of that as something for me to take away and discuss with the Chief Executive. Any other questions on the forward plan for the rest of this month or October? No? Okay, so we're happy to note that. Okay, that concludes our formal business for this evening. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you to all the Cabinet members who have come along this evening. Apologies again, Mr. Westwood, for getting your name wrong. I have previously in my head called you Mr. Eastwood as well. It's just one of those names where there's too many woods, and I get confused. So my apologies again for the confusion earlier. Thank you, Mr. Wallace, and if you can pass on our thanks to Mr. Lee for coming along and contributing, and to all the officers who supported us this evening. Have a lovely evening, safe journey home. Many thanks.
Thank you, Chair.